Hello, and welcome to this online session for the Mitigation Message Calendar tool for social media. My name is Cindy Wirz, and I am the Community Education and Outreach Specialist for Region 6 in the Mitigation Division. I will be joined today by Carmen Castro, who is our Digital Team Lead for External Affairs here in Region 6. Together, we will be conducting this session, and we appreciate you being here with us today. So before I started talking about mitigation messaging, I wanted to touch on the virus in the room. COVID-19 is being talked about everywhere. It's affecting everything we do, from how we eat out to how we communicate. As evidenced by this virtual conference, our modes of communication have had to evolve, and we've had to find new ways to reach our audience. At Region 6 right now, most staff are teleworking, and our ability to use our conference call-in lines have been significantly modified. So now we conduct meetings via Adobe Connect, Zoom, or in the case of this recording, MS Teams. A silver lining for COVID-19, besides the hilarious memes, such as the cat sitting at a sewing machine saying, "I'm making you a mask, Karen, so you can go back to work," is how most folks have learned to and understand what the word mitigation means. They understand that if they wash their hands, avoid touching their face, and keeping their hands clean and sneezing in their sleeve, they will play down or reduce the likelihood of being exposed to COVID. And that's just some ways that you can prevent the spread. But it also proves that mitigation works. Now, our job is to frame it in such a way that to make it work for natural disasters. So today we're talking about messaging. And the fact is, COVID will not stop a hurricane, a tornado, or any other natural disaster, as we've already seen. So we are still charged with teaching and encouraging individuals to take action now to reduce the impacts of natural disasters on themselves and their community. So this is our agenda of what we'll be talking about today. We'll talk about how this whole project came about, the calendar itself, the use of hashtags, amplifying the message, graphics and videos, and next steps. So a little bit about how it came about. In late 2018, Sandy Keefe, the Mitigation Division Director for Region 6, came to me and asked me to develop a messaging strategy. Now, she was not specific about whether it should be pre-disaster or post-disaster, so I took it upon myself to look at as many different messaging strategies as I could find. And I did that. And I found them, multitudes of them. In fact, there are about 10 represented here. You can see they range from state-specific to program-specific, such as flood insurance or risk map. There's preparedness, there's grant outreach. They're all there. But to say that I was overwhelmed is an understatement. I got gray hair trying to make this work, and it raised the question, how can we expect our stakeholders to find messages that they need to put out on social media? So we created the Region 6 Communications Group, the idea being to work with our partners and to find existing avenues where messaging was working. So our group is made up of mitigation, our external affairs team, and our national preparedness partners. And the purpose was for mitigation messages to become as standardized as the messages you see on ready.gov and the seasonal preparedness calendar that they put out each year. So the group pulled messages, videos, graphics, various strategies, and put them into a plug and play format as a calendar. It was something that everyone can use. That was our goal. So, because let's face it, mitigation messages are not the first thing that pops into anyone's mind. And the goal is to change the way people think about mitigation. And to test that hypothesis, I actually conducted this presentation 7 times over the course of April and May and asked the question, what is your primary concern or issue with messaging? And surprisingly, the answers will not shock you. We need clear messages, concise, consistency. They need to be simple, understandable. 280 characters less characters or less for our Twitter fans, and we don't even have a messaging strategy. So this is where the Region 6 social mitigation calendar, mitigation message calendar for social media can come into play. And it's about changing mindsets. Whether it's changing awareness or actions, it's like turning a giant cargo ship. You have to turn it incrementally. And that's what we're doing here in Region 6. As Mitigation has worked with our external affairs partners to put out one mitigation message per week on our social media platforms, because we know that small steps can lead to big changes. And so, with the goal being to create a calendar that is user-friendly, messages that are evergreen, that can serve as a drumbeat for consistent, clear, concise messages, that is what we did. The calendar itself has gone through many iterations to try and accomplish that goal. And so what you'll see on your right is an example. This is the month of January. It is, if you'll see, the month is highlighted in blue, and you'll see the topic is under the month, which, for instance, the first one is financial preparedness, followed in the second column by the message itself, and then a link to where you can find that message online. We took the guesswork out. We're trying to demystify the message search, and it's the key to what makes this a successful product. And you may be asking, how did we determine which message for which week, and how did that fit, and how did that work? Well, we used a product that already works. We took the Ready.gov seasonal preparedness calendar, used their themes, such as May is Building Sciences Month, or June 1st starts hurricane preparedness because it starts hurricane season. We used those themes and plugged in our mitigation messages. And the idea is to create this tool and then to see what the outcomes will be. And with that, we talk about how to track and measure the outcomes and success of our media campaign. So I'm going to turn this over to Carmen Castro, and she's going to take you to the next step.
So the next steps that we needed to make sure to do is that we were all as one voice, unified. So the way we did this was the strategy team decided on these 4 simple, very direct hashtags, which you see on screen. Our 6 mitigates: know your risk, protect your investment, and of course, plan ahead. The purpose of hashtags is to create virtual bookmarkers where we have our own sort of safe space where we're all speaking in the same language, echoing the same messages. And so that was important for us to make sure that we had the buy-in, and hopefully, of course, your buy-in for the future to keep this going on. And that way we have multiple ways that we're hitting the same audience. So one way to get that information actually is Tagboard. There's also now other free resources such as Hootsuite, where you basically just log in with your existing Twitter or Facebook login accounts, and you can see what everyone else is saying based on these hashtags regionally. So just to give you a taste of our success with the strategy so far, here are a couple of examples that we've been able to expand on. It's given us an opportunity to highlight things from various partners. As you see here, we've had an opportunity where the Weather Channel was focusing on the importance and the impacts of hurricane season, but also floods in general. And that's the reality of some of our region, FEMA Region 6, with our states and our neighboring states. So that was an opportunity for us to echo that, no matter where it rains, it can always flood, and people are highly encouraged to go check their current flood maps and kind of get familiar with that. Other opportunities we've had are with like the city of Tulsa in Oklahoma, where they were just highlighting the 1-year anniversary of the May Arkansas River flood that happened in 2019. here in Texas, at the state level, we had an opportunity to engage with the regional administrator, and we were promoting the Flood Awareness Week, and basically just reminding people the purpose of why you should take a look at your insurance coverage every year, because that can impact your current financial situation, and it's unpredictable. And then, of course, it also gives us a chance to connect with our national partners. We had an opportunity where the National Flood Insurance Program Chief Executive, Mr. David Marston, met our current team that's working long-term Hurricane Harvey. So that was an opportunity that otherwise may not have gotten much activity, but it shows that we're still connected with the community and we're doing outreach. And of course, most of all, we have not left that disaster. We continue to work around the clock for everyone. So as you can see, we're bringing all these pieces of the puzzle together. We're bringing the local, the state, the private, the weather experts, and of course, our state insurance departments, so that we all can tackle and educate the public from this one message. And with that, I will turn it over to Cindy.
Thank you, Carmen. I appreciate your presentation, sharing with everyone how we can use those hashtags to track and measure the reach of our messaging is key to being successful. So what you have here before you now is who has the loudest voice. When I was invited, the last time I was invited to ASFPM, this is what I spoke on, was messaging and who has the loudest voice. I even used megaphones then as well. FEMA has the smallest voice, followed by state, and then local, who has the largest voice. If you think about COVID and the response that we've had, FEMA is acting as the coordinating agency, but we are more listening to our governors who have determined when and how we will reopen our businesses in our states, in our respective states. And then even drilling down further, we listen to our mayors, our county judges, our council people as to when they feel that we can go back to work. The same is true after pre and post disaster messaging. And this way, with the calendar and the hashtags, you have a product that you can use that will work on any level. And that's what we want, is to make it easy for everyone to use. So now you know who has the loudest voice. And as you can see here, I've written the Fabergé analogy. Yes, I'm dating myself, but in the 70s, Farrah Fawcett, with her long blonde locks, would look into the camera and say, I love Fabergé organic shampoo, and I use it every day. And if I tell two people, and then they tell two people, and so on, and so on, and so on, suddenly everyone's using Fabergé organic shampoo. That's what we want to have happen with the mitigation message. We want to post it. Then you can post it, and then your friends post it, and so forth and so on. And we suddenly will see a trend with regard to mitigation messaging. And with that, we may see a trend in the purchase of flood insurance, or people taking action now to reduce future risk, maybe by installing wind retrofits if they're having the roof redone. And once we use the hashtags such as R6 mitigates, we can see how far our message has gone. And so the other idea is to amplify this message through this presentation. This is another amplification. You can take this calendar, starting with one message a week, and then you can plug in other messages as you go along. You become part of the amplification of messages, the part that may change behavior. Remember, incremental changes, small steps lead to big things. But the question becomes, how do you find the graphics? How do you find the videos? How do you find the messages? Yes, the calendar is great, but that's only one message per week. Well, the good news is we started that work for you. Region 6 has curated a list of graphics and videos for your use. We've gathered them from FEMA.gov, Ready.gov, and even Flash. And the topics range from preparedness pre-disaster to post-disaster, map changes, COVID, fire, just to name a few. Keeping in mind the megaphones and who has the greatest impact when it comes to messaging, this means taking a FEMA message and making it your own and making it represent your city, your county, your state, your parish, your tribe. And if you'll look to the right, you'll see a message I have here. It's protect the life you've built with flood insurance. This is a standard FEMA flood message. Well, I have made a change. And this change is to add the logo for the Texas Department of Emergency Management. Don't be upset, but Texas is our host, so we wanted to be sure and highlight them for this example. But now you've got a state identifier, something that has been added that may have an impact on how far the message will go. It makes it more accepted and perhaps acted on. So imagine if you used your city, your county, your parish, your tribal logo, your state logo, would there be more of an impact? The thought is yes, because residents and business owners are more likely to take action based on what people they trust have told them. And then when you use the hashtag, such as R6 Mitigates, you will begin to see that message spread around. You'll begin to see that being shared with other folks and individuals and residents of your community. And if we are following you, meaning FEMA Region 6, we can amplify your message. If you're following us, you can amplify ours. In the ideal world, a calendar will become a drumbeat, a consistent, concise message that is given and delivered each week that becomes the norm and becomes what people are used to seeing. It provides blue sky messaging, and then it serves the purpose of being brought into the post-disaster messaging discussion. Over the course of my experience, I have learned that mitigation messaging is not the first thing out the door after a disaster. And while it should be response and recovery, there are those who are impacted who are already going back in their homes, they're already making repairs, and they haven't sought the advice or the encouragement of their city, county, or state. This is a missed opportunity, and Region 6 is working with our external affairs partners to address this, to try and get some messages out earlier. And remember, this is a slow incremental change, so we're starting with post-disaster flooding. Can't do them all at once. And as this comes along, we will have more details. So the calendar, the graphics, and the videos are tools for you to use, either to strengthen your existing social media presence or to create one. And the goal is to update these videos and graphics for your use every 3 to 6 months as new products become available, to take out the guesswork, to take out the mystification of finding a message. Because we want you to be able to focus on your most pressing issues and not to have to search through multiple messaging strategies to find what you need to send out to your residents. To that end, if you're interested in having these messages and materials sent to you, you can contact me, and I'll have that information up on the screen here shortly. Another effort we will be making in the very near future is to send out our mitigation message, weekly message, through Gov Delivery. And like the calendar, it will have the graphic, the link to the graphic, and what the message is for your use. Again, taking one more step to make it easier for you. In conclusion, this tool was built for you. It was meant to be an easily accessed, a means of messaging without having to dig for messages, and to cover those concerns that I mentioned in the beginning, to be clear, concise, consistent, to be simple, to be understandable, less than 280 characters. And now you have something you can build your own messaging strategy with. Because together, we can get the mitigation message cargo shipped headed in the direction we want, so that the word mitigation isn't foreign, that folks are more likely to reduce their future risk and by taking action now, and therefore be more prepared should disaster occur. And I think we can agree that's what we all want. We appreciate your time and attention. Here is my contact information along with the short bio. And we will be going live in a few minutes to talk with you and to answer any of your questions. I would like to now put up Carmen's contact information and bio. And you can see she is very active in her community, which is awesome. And I would like to thank Carmen for her time and her partnership on this effort and many others. And with that, we will go live now to the question and answer session. Thank you and have a great conference.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Peter Herrick. I'm the communications lead for the Risk Management Directorate at FEMA, and we're here to talk to you about experiential learning and pop-ups for resilience. I'm joined by two of my colleagues, Selena Wright and Amy Rosenband, who will introduce themselves in a second. But I want to thank you for joining this session. We're going to talk about different ways that we can start to break through communications and help drive more mitigation action. So with that, Selena, would you like to introduce yourself?
Sure. Thank you so much, Peter. This is Selena Wright, and I'm with Resilience Action Partners, and I'm happy to speak with you today a little bit about experiential learning and what FEMA did in order to think about virtual reality and how it can help to communicate flood risk to different audiences.
And hi, everyone. I'm Amy Rosenband. I'm the Regional Director for Resilience Action Partners. And I'm excited to talk today about some of the experiential learning and pop-ups that have taken place in FEMA's regions.
So I talked a little bit at the front end about how do you break through all the noise. There's a lot of communications going on in the world right now, and it's hard to really make sure that you're resonating with people. How do you make sure that it's not just a message they hear and then it goes in one ear and out the other? How does it resonate? How do they take it to action? How do they understand what they can do about it? And it's something that we've started to invest a lot more in, because as we know, just telling people that they're at risk and that they should do something isn't enough. We need to be doing more. Next slide, please. And so that's why we're talking about experiential marketing. It's one thing for me to tell you sitting around the dining room table about how my day was. It's an entirely different thing for you to go through it yourself. We've all been there around the holidays and somebody says, but you had to be there. And it's always true. They may be a great storyteller, but it's still not the same thing as experiencing it for yourself. So we need to make sure that we're doing more than just telling people, that we're walking them through what the experience is like. And there's a lot of different ways that we can do that. But we need to make sure that it's something they build an emotional connection to, and it doesn't become something that they just hear. Next slide, please. So 65% of all consumers say that live events and product demonstrations help them fully understand a product better than any commercial or other method would. I think that's important. It shouldn't surprise anybody. We've all seen the infomercials late at night when you can't sleep, and you go, maybe you buy it, maybe you don't. But if you see it in person, or a friend comes to you and shows you how to use it and sees the value in it, you're a lot more likely to be interested in the product and work for it. So that's a huge component of what we're talking about here. And we want to talk about what it can mean for resilience and for risk awareness. Next slide, please. So when we talk about it, it needs to rest on some behavioral science principles. And there's two that really come into play here. One is cognitive discounting or hyperbolic discounting. And basically what that means is, I would much rather have some immediate gratification than put in the work for the long-term benefit. I don't know about you, but I've still got that little kid inside of me that if somebody tells me I can have a cookie now or 2 cookies later, I'm taking the cookie now and I'm not looking back. And so we need to talk about how we start to break through that process. How do we help people understand the long-term value versus the short-term gain and make smarter, more resilient decisions? The other component of that is optimism bias. It's really easy to see risk information and say, but that's not going to happen to me. We see it all the time with hurricane warnings and with other natural disasters. People go, it's not going to be that big of a deal this time. I can ride it out. And sometimes they're right, but often they're wrong. And the issue there really is that they're making decisions not based on the facts, not based on information, but on what they think they believe. And that can be very difficult to come through. And so what we're talking about employing here is embodied cognition. How do we help people understand these things by actually having it feel like it's occurring to them? You know, when we talk about some of the tools that we're going to discuss here, it's easy to look at the overall picture and say, if only we could help people understand it. it's one thing for me to tell you what it's like to experience a flood, but until you actually do, it's still just words, and you may not understand the risk and the emotional connection of being in that moment and that fear, and recognizing that either your property, your safety, or both are in danger. Next slide, please. So we're going to talk through a bunch of different examples. Obviously, you're not just going to hear from me. We're going to tag team this a little bit, but I'll start off with the first one. Selena, if you can go to the next slide, which is immersed virtual reality. At this point, I'm assuming many of you have heard of this. If you've not gone through it, unfortunately, virtual conferences make it really difficult to actually employ that. But hopefully you've gone through it before. If not, we'll see you next year at ASFPM, and we'll make sure to get you to go through it. What we recognize is that as much as I'd like to have everybody experience a flood, not in real life, but so that way they have the emotional connection, it turns out no one that I work for will let me flood a community. So we want to make sure that people can have that emotional connection to it. How do we help it feel like what that actually is? And so that's what the virtual reality experience is. It's about 5 minutes. Selena's going to talk in more detail about it, but it helps people feel like it's actually occurring to them, because the brain isn't fully developed to always be able to understand the difference between actual reality and virtual reality. And I know you're going to sit there and say, but Peter, that's not true. I'm smart enough to know the difference. And I'm going to tell you that I said the exact same thing before I went through the first time. And there's a part where you have to walk a little plank, and I almost jumped face first into a wall. So it's easy to say that until you go through it. But much like experiential marketing, I can tell you, but until you go through it yourself, you won't really know. Selena?
Sure, I'll go ahead and take some time to walk you all through the scenes. But at first, let me just say that in 2016, Risk Management Directorate took the opportunity to want to explore how to best reach specific audiences. And this audience for Immerse is actually the local official. There was some research done by Stanford University that showed that our minds had not been fully developed yet to understand what actually is occurring, if it's virtual or if it's the actual reality. So with that Stanford study and with some other research, I would say risk management took a leap and invested in HTC Vive Kit to understand how we can use virtual reality for behavior change, which is something else Stanford attributed to virtual reality. So what you'll see is I'll walk you through this experience, some slides, and then we'll play a short video of what a person would experience if they're going through the virtual reality experience. So the first scene is the residential home, and this is not by chance. We started here so folks have a personal connection to the flood. We all can look around at what is happening with the flood damage, and you see things that are super personal to us. The soccer ball or the doll. In the actual experience, there's even a note, from family saying that, we left, we evacuated. So it definitely is pulling in some of the reality of what happens when there is a flooded situation. It's not a safe situation to be in. So from the home, we go into the community a bit. In this scene, there's traffic, the streets are flooded, and the user in the experience is actually directing people to get through the specific intersection. It's a little bit chaotic there. And then we go into a school, and this is what Peter mentioned earlier, where we're rescuing a staff member and having to walk literally on a plank in order to get the staff member out. And it's kind of interesting. You're looking at the illustration, and you're looking at this, flood town, USA, flood town elementary school, and you're thinking, well, I know that this is not real. But as you're actually going through the experience, again, your mind is telling you that actually it feels very real. And so you literally will put one foot in front of the other, trying to make sure you're safely walking to safety. Following this, the user goes into an emergency command center, op center, and is able to make mitigation decisions. Following those mitigation decisions, they're able to understand how they have better supported their community with flood mitigation applications. So they'll then go back into the experience and see some of the changes that have occurred. So right now, what I'll do is I will play this short video and talk you through some of the scenes that you have just seen some screenshots on. So again, you start off, there's a tablet. on the table, and your wand for the HTC Vive becomes your flashlight. It also becomes your wand for directing traffic, so it's interactive in that way. And again, a flashlight to help the person get themselves get evacuated from the school. And you're telling them, go ahead, walk this way. And then you're in the command center, you're looking at your town, and you're looking at some of the mitigation actions that you like to take. And then you go back into the scenario and you're actually able to see what has taken place and why your community is now safer. And this is just a view of the street that was congested. And again, for people who may not be too knowledgeable or have seen all these different ways to mitigate a community, they actually are learning in the process what some of these efforts are. Okay, so that's Immersed. Again, it was formally released in 2017, and to date there's been about 2,600 users who've experienced it in more than 25 states. So like Peter said, it's hard to do that virtually, but I hope that you can get a good sense off of what we've just shown you. So with that, I will actually just talk a little bit about why this is significant. As many of you know, being at ASFPM, is that mitigation definitely has a significant ROI. For every dollar spent, there's $6 that will be saved later. And that is something that we definitely communicate when we're having users go through the immersive experience. In addition to that, once they have gone through the experience, we give them information on mitigation resources, as well as more information about the immersive experience. So I'll pass it to Amy to talk a little bit about Floodwalk and how that application is being used to help people understand mitigation.
Great, thanks so much, Selena. So now we'd like to share some additional examples of experiential learning and pop-up experiences that FEMA's Risk Management Directorate has activated in the region. So in 2019, FEMA Region 8 launched an augmented reality experience that both visualizes the risks from flooding and tells the story of mitigation actions across the city of Denver to improve the areas where people live, work, and play. The Floodwalk mobile app, which is centered in Denver's Confluence Park, features 6 unique experiences that spotlight past flood scenarios, as well as current and planned mitigation activities. The Floodwalk was made possible through partnerships with the City and County of Denver, Urban Drainage and Flood Control District, the Greenway Foundation, and Chatfield Reservoir Mitigation Company. You can download the app on either the App Store or Google Play. So next slide. There are 2 ways to engage with the app. One is on-site at Denver's Confluence Park, and the other is off-site at any other location. Using the app, you can explore various experiences from each location without needing to be there. As you enter the app, it asks you which locations you want to experience. While the app currently has 1 location in Denver, it is built to spotlight flood mitigation efforts in additional locations in the future. So as I mentioned on the next slide, there are 6 unique experiences within the app. In one experience, for example, the user can toggle between multiple historic flood levels to display the water levels as they would exist in the park today, all through your phone's camera. Experience 3 shows the intersection of Cherry Creek and the South Platte River, which has played a vital role in the development and growth of Denver. It's appropriately positioned at the location of Denver's founding, and this experience celebrates the revitalization of the river by showcasing all of the amenities that visitors and residents can now experience. This experience features hotspots that contain additional information, visuals, and links to partner organizations. In Experience 4, this one focuses on the evolution of Confluence Park, depicting a before and after image to demonstrate the city's significant investment and restoration effort. So that's the Floodwalk, and we have a couple of other examples to share today. So in one example of a pop-up experience, In FEMA Region 10, FEMA co-hosted a storytelling booth with the Multnomah County Drainage District at the 24th Annual Columbia Slaw Watershed Council Regatta. At the storytelling booth, participants could share their experiences of living, working, and recreating behind the levee system. FEMA captured 16 interviews, both in English and in Spanish. These interviews will be used to enhance awareness about flood risk in the area, with the goal of increasing a sense of ownership over both risk and action. Another example of experiential learning came in the form of a field trip. In August of 2019, FEMA Region 3 held a risk reduction consultation in DC to discuss flood risk and resilience in the nation's capital. For the first time, the region incorporated a mobile workshop into the event. More than 30 meeting attendees boarded a chartered bus to tour the locations of the mitigation opportunities that were discussed that day, including Kenilworth Park, the Cardozo Education Campus, and the Southwest Waterfront. The mobile workshop provided tangible examples of flood mitigation projects and grounded the day's discussions in a real-world context. So where can we take the ideas of experiential learning and pop-ups for resilience going forward? In FEMA Region 8, FEMA sponsored a challenge in conjunction with EarthForce to improve STEM curricula in Northern Colorado public schools through project-based learning. And several regions have started to explore the connection between mitigation and the arts. Moving forward, FEMA can consider additional partners, venues, and creative ideas to reach new audiences through experiences.
So I have the honor of bringing this presentation home. Let's talk a little bit about the checklist. So we've talked about some examples that FEMA's done in the past, but you're probably thinking, how does this apply to me? Maybe I can invest in some of these things, maybe I can't, maybe I want to try something different. Either way, as you start to move through a number of these different options, you have to ask yourself some basic questions. Does it have a wow factor? We'd like to joke that Immersed, despite all of the value that it has, draws a lot of people in because it's got a little bit of a whiz-bang factor. It's got some virtual reality to it. It starts to draw people in. It looks really entertaining as you watch people go through the experience. It needs to have some attraction that is about the experience itself. Floodwalk is very similar. You walk through Confluence Park, like Amy said, and you'll see some different totems that help lay out where places are. And so there are things that draw people in, that start to pique people's interest. Second is you go through who's the target audience. You need to make sure that you're making something that isn't just whiz-bangy. It needs to be geared towards a specific group of people, and it needs to be geared towards them to drive a specific outcome. You need to make sure that you have that in mind. It's not something you can really figure out as you start to move through the process, because it's going to shape all sorts of decisions that you make throughout the development. The second part is, why would they want to participate? All right, you've got your whiz-bangy factor, you've got the people that you want to go do something. Now you need to make sure that it's something that they want to be a part of. How do you make sure that you're pulling people in and that it's a value for them? A huge part of it, and it's the question that we ask all the time, what's in it for me? Why should they want to go through this experience? Why should they want to be a part of it? Next, has the idea been done before? There's a number of virtual reality tools out there. So virtual reality's been done before, augmented reality's been done before, storytelling's been done before, but how is ours different? Ours focuses on flood risk. Ours talks with the community and gets their perspective rather than our perspective. Ours does these things. It's okay to be doing something in a similar format or similar style, but you need to make sure that you can differentiate why yours is different. The other piece of that is it's just better use of resources. If somebody else is doing it and doing it well, let's continue to build all of the different tools that we have to help the community drive mitigation action. How do we want the user to feel at different points? So as we go through this process, it can be a little difficult. There's a lot that you want people to feel. Immersed is a 5-minute experience. The flood walk obviously depends on how long people choose to interact with it, but you want people to go through a little bit of a journey. I talked on the front end about having it resonate with people, and that means an emotional connection to them. So do you want them to be intrigued, concerned, excited? What does that look like? How do you build that through the experience for them? So that way at the end, they're ready to go do something, whether it be ask more questions, take action, do a resource, build a grant. I don't know. It's going to depend on what it is that you're trying to accomplish. Does it fit within your overall strategy? This is a conversation we have all the time. Does it make sense for your organization, for where you're going, where you're going to be in 3 or 5 years? You need to make sure that you're fitting it in and it doesn't feel like this thing that we did that's really cool, but it doesn't fit with the rest of our organization. And then lastly, the all-important question, the question that my boss is asking me all the time, how are we going to measure success? And this is important to make sure that you have on the front end, because it's going to decide a number of factors as you build whatever it is that you're building. You want to make sure that as you go through, you can say, I intend to have people take this action, download this resource, go visit this place, ask these questions, and then even to make sure that you're building in a way to measure that. So that way you know that it's impactful. So that way when you're ready and you're excited and you want to do version 2, you can explain this is why this is important and effective. You can continue to help people understand how you're driving whatever it is your goal is. And so Selena, if you can take us to the last slide, our contact information is up here. Obviously you see all 3 of our email addresses. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, opinions, you want to send us a smoke signal, by all means, I'll try and wait outside for a little while. But our email addresses are here. Drop us a note. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to help you. While we may have sort of been the expert in this part of the presentation, we also want to learn from you. What ideas and suggestions do you have? How can we help? Because at the end of the day, it's going to take all of us to go through this process to drive more mitigation action. With that, on behalf of all 3 of us, I want to say thank you, and I'll kick it over to my unrecorded self to answer any questions that you may have.
I really want to thank Peter and Amy and Selena. That was great. I've had the opportunity to do Immersed before, and I completely share that it's a really awesome and eye-opening experience. So that's I just want to pass that along. And Allison Harden submitted a question, shared a similar experience, saying that she had been able to experience this last year at ASFPM, but she was saying, how do we get it in our community? I know you put your information there at the end of the presentation. So what is the best way for people to possibly bring this to their community?
Yeah, so Mark, the easiest way is to have them work through their FEMA region. They should have a point of contact who can make the request. We really want to build that relationship between communities, the states, and the regions first. But if all else fails, you saw my contact information there. Feel free to drop me a note. I'll start the process back into the right chain, and I'm happy to help filter that for people.
So we've got a few other questions coming in here. So, you know, this is always a challenge to attempt my little bit of humor, but I believe Ron Swanson submitted a question that says, is that the Parks and Recreation Office? So I'm just going to turn that over to you, Peter, see if you can.
I saw that come in and I was like, oh, I hope Mark asks this question. It is not, and not a small part of that is because it would be copyright infringement. Any similarity is purely coincidental, but I appreciate somebody making the observation.
I'm just monitoring the site here for more questions. Definitely a lot of people were asking about how to find it. So in case people didn't see in the Q&A session, I know several links were given, and just to confirm, right, it's available both in the, not the Immersed, but the flood walk can be found in the Google store or in the iTunes store. Is that correct? Or Apple, I should say. So. Yep.
Yeah, it's available in both stores. Flood walk, one word, should be the first thing that pops up. You saw the imagery as Selena and Amy were talking. It shows what that logo looks like. It's pretty straightforward, and the description clearly states it's with us. So I encourage people to download it. I keep it on my phone, and I haven't been to Denver in probably 15 years. So it's not like it was super recent, but it's still very valuable even for people that aren't in Denver.
One of the questions that came up in the earlier session that was tied, you know, it was more on the social media side, but they were asking about a correlation if they've seen between users of social media and, let's say, flood insurance. Have you, anytime you all have rolled out Immersed or any of these others, have you seen even the smallest correlation anywhere where there has been greater interest in flood insurance or mitigation or something along those lines?
Yes, I'm happy to start this one, and then I'm very happy to turn it over to Amy and Selena to bring it home. So the short answer is we don't have enough of the measurement piece in it. I mean, I talked at the end about why it's so important, and part of it is because my boss is literally asking that question all the time, and we've been trying to build some measurement components after the fact. So that's a lesson learned for us. It's hard to draw the correlation between insurance sales or other mitigation activities in Immersed, in large part because for most people that are requesting it and going through it, it's either at a conference where the geography isn't super relevant, or it's part of a map update. And so they're already having more conversations. And so it's hard to tell, is it just correlation because it's happening and the conversation's more present? Is it causation? Is it a little bit of both? And so that's a hard part for us to figure out as we build our measurement tools. But I'm happy to let the smarter people bring this one home.
Sure. So we do collect the output. So we do collect the number of events. We collect the number of people who went through the experience, number of different organizations that actually requested the software because they have their own HTC Vive and they want to, for educational purposes, have immersed with them and with their students. We are making recommendations for how we can look at overall outcomes, which would be, since this one was, historically tied to the local official and mitigation actions, it would be in the long term, how do we, through appropriate processes, get the approval to reach out to those who've gone through Immerse and see if they have requested more information about learning about mitigation in general. And of course, the ultimate action would be, have they taken steps to have mitigation actions within their communities?
Yeah, I agree. I think the only thing I would add is that there's probably a little bit more that we might be able to measure ultimately in terms of awareness, and flood risk awareness, maybe not the direct correlation yet, between making that jump between that and, NFIP policy adoption. But, as Peter mentioned, definitely something that we're looking to augment in the future.
So I've got a few more questions coming in now. So one question Brian asked is, how much time or effort is involved or was involved in creating something like FloodWalk? So,
Amy, do you want to take this one?
Sure. Yeah, I think overall, from kind of initial concept through actual deployment, it was definitely over a year. There were a lot of folks who were involved, in terms of strategy, kind of on the initial end. Also, of course, all of the technical components. And then the partnership development was a huge aspect of that as well. Working closely with the City of Denver and the Greenway Foundation and others. So, a lot of work, I think, definitely to get it off the ground. But, we're really excited about where it's at and kind of its potential to move into other cities.
Another question, kind of similar on the technical side of things. It says, have you ever thought, or can you integrate flood mapping polygons? So risk map data, live data, could you integrate it in with the app?
I don't know who asked that question, but I'd like to thank them very, very much for it, because I've been pushing for that for a little while. And I don't mean like there's opposition to it. There's obviously a lot that it takes to do that process. One of the things that we've talked about is a long-term goal. I mean, you saw some of the questions that were listed at the end, and what are we building to? And in the perfect world, I'd like to be able to leverage the lessons learned through Immerse, the process and the technology that we have through the flood walk and the National Flood Hazard Layer to actually give people up-to-date access to their flood risk information. Recognizing that there's a regulatory component, maybe there's a non-reg component that goes with that, maybe there's different intervals and all that sort of stuff. But that's not a short-term question. I ask it on a regular basis. We've talked about it as part of a 3 to 5 year strategy, because with the federal government, and it takes a while to get anything done. But that's where we'd like to go. I'm not committing us to actually being there in 3 to 5 years, but it's how we talk about the long-term growth of these technology tools.
Here's a more technical question as well. Someone asked, is there a building tool to help if someone wanted to create something like FloodWalk on their own?
So that's an interesting question. I will tap Amy in to wrap this up. We've used some subcontractors to help us develop that tool, and the way that we've developed it, it's something that we can continue to utilize the same app on your smartphone to add additional cities that Amy talked about. And so that's how we've developed it. We don't have anything open source at this point in time. And to be honest, we haven't even made it far enough down in the conversation to even really explore that too much. But Amy, I don't know if you have anything you want to add there as well.
No, I think you covered it well.
Someone asked about the field trip. I'm kind of curious on this one. It says, when it comes to the field trip like that, who should be involved? Who's on the bus is essentially the question.
Yeah, so that one was a regular risk reduction consultation with state and local officials. And I believe that was who was on the bus that day, along with FEMA and some contract support. But yeah, and I think, really they had a session in the morning where they discussed
what they were going to see and, you know, the various mitigation projects. And then they were actually able to bring it to life, which I think, you know, really helped enhance the conversation and hopefully some of the mitigation partnerships going forward.
All right, well, we are right at least according to my clock, we're right at 4:30. So I'm going to do my job as moderator to keep us moving along and get us on target. So I want to thank Peter and Amy and Selena. That was awesome. If you ever get a chance to do Immersed, I highly recommend it. Again, it's really fun. Obviously, a little bit more challenging in our virtual environment, but I think, you know, next year is certainly and other times when we're all together, everyone should take advantage of that. So thank you again. So I'm going to actually go ahead and introduce and turn it over to our third presentation. Mr. Jack Heide with FEMA Region 2 is going to be giving a presentation entitled Engaging the Arts to Promote Disaster Risk Reduction. So I'm going to turn it over at this point.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Engaging the Arts to Promote Disaster Risk Reduction. My name is Jack Heide. I'm a supervisory community planner at FEMA Region 2 in the Hazard Mitigation Division. And today I would like to talk to you about art. And why should you care about art? This sculpture of Hands Reaching Out the Sea by Lorenzo Quinn in Venice, Italy is a very powerful representation of the potential impacts of future risk and sea level rise that many communities across the world face. And this imagery has the potential to strike and move people in a way that can be more powerful and more memorable than any technical guidance or booklet that FEMA or many others of our industry create. And there's nothing like a pamphlet that's created and then just sits on a shelf for years on end and doesn't really speak to people. Another reason to engage the arts is within the FEMA strategic plan that I'm sure many of you are familiar with. The number one item on the list is to build a culture of preparedness. And I don't know how you build a culture of preparedness without actually engaging the sort of keepers of culture, which is the local artists and arts organizations and museums and historical locations across the country, because that's where our culture is and that's where our culture is based off of. And artists have this real potential to highlight and communicate our culture. And preparedness is probably best brought into those cultural mechanisms as opposed to trying to reestablish or establish a brand new culture on its own. And with that, a group of academic professionals from many universities got together with FEMA, and they created this sort of guide to how do you build a culture of preparedness. And so some of the guiding principles of this document are, you know, to focus on trust amongst individual communities and not just, you know, our traditional emergency management folks and a handful of others, but really engaging this whole community, where you get into the second principle of inclusion, and that's really inclusion of everyone. And also the third principle is this cross-cultural communication. So making sure that within the whole community, you're engaging with the entire community and speaking to their culture in a way that makes sense for them to engage in the preparedness conversation. And finally, supporting local practices and successes. You know, FEMA's, one of FEMA's big guiding principles is this idea that all disasters start locally and end locally. So really focusing on those practices and those ideas within emergency management that work best in local communities based on their culture is the most appropriate way to approach this culture of preparedness. So the value of the arts is not widely known. So I thought I'd spend a little bit of time talking about some of the values of the art from both like a societal way and also an economic way as well. So society contributes to the community cohesion and cultural pride. It really helps into health and well-being and illuminates our personal lives and enriches our emotional world. For the economy, in 2017, the arts sector contributed $742 billion, or roughly 4.2% of our country's GDP. Within education, children from low-income families who take part in the arts are actually 3 times more likely to get a degree. And so this really highlights just a handful of some of the benefits of the arts, although there are many others that exist. A great resource to look at for gathering economic impacts related to the arts is the National Endowment for the Arts commissioned a very large research analysis of the economic principles. So you can go to this website and you can check out and click on your state, any state you want, and you can get an overview of this sort of economic impacts. So what we show here is on a national scale, more than 2 million people in the US, his primary job is artists. And artists, you can see, make up a lot more of their sector than many other sectors that we traditionally think of and focus on within our country, such as, you know, scientists and physicians and sales, marketing. And this really highlights the idea that when we talk about a whole community approach to emergency management and floodplain management, that artists do make up a large portion of our workforce, and they often are small independent businesses, which, as many of us know and recognize as a part of our own like American culture, is that's really believed to be the backbone of our country. So supporting small businesses is very important. And many times local artists are left out of that conversation when it comes to response and recovery, and especially the mitigation conversation. So this is arts-related employment in Texas. So you can see in the state of Texas, there are over 350,000 arts-related workers in the state, and they bring in about 21.2 billion in compensation to the state of Texas every year. This particular slide shows total arts and cultural production in the country. So once again, looking at that $763 billion every year and roughly 4.2% of the GDP for our country. This one takes a deeper dive into specific sectors of the arts. So on the left here, we see independent artists, writers, and performance bring in about 22 billion into the country. And on the right, we see performing arts companies, which bring in about 17.8 billion. So one of the reasons to really look at the arts is this idea that, you know, it makes up a good chunk of our economy. And from a numbers perspective, we always want to protect the economy and make the economy more resilient. So why wouldn't you try to mitigate and consider the arts community when you're looking at preparing your community for disasters, and especially flooding? In addition to, we will later get into the idea that also using artists to promote floodplain management and risk communication is another avenue you can engage the arts. So here is another great directory of information for the National Assembly of State Arts Agency, also called NASA. Here we see you can click on any state. This one particularly is Pennsylvania, and it highlights the Pennsylvania Council of the Arts, so you can get contact information for the state agent responsible for any of the arts in any of your states. In addition, they also carry some economic data with the creative workforce state profiles. Here we can see highlighted the state of West Virginia. They are $850 million in compensation bringing into the state of West Virginia every year, and have over 17,000 employed in the arts and cultural industries. Now to shift gears a little bit and talk about some of the work that's happening around the country and a little bit in the world around this idea of engaging the arts and hazard mitigation in your risk communication as well. So here we have the USVI hazard mitigation plan, which is currently in development. The plan has 4 overarching concepts that are supposed to be guiding the whole plan. The first 3, resilience, sustainability, and climate adaptation, shouldn't be new to many of us, but the unique piece of this is they're actually making cultural awareness a big part of the plan. They want to make sure that the plan is culturally relevant to the USVI. That means that they're attempting not to just follow best practices or one-size-fit-all planning or projects. They're really making sure that anything they propose is not only helping to protect the culture, but the culture is infused into all aspects of the plan and the projects. which is a very unique perspective, as culture is very important to the USVI. And if you ever go there, you can see that culture is just present everywhere you go. So finding ways to ingrain that into the plan makes it more relevant, not just to makes it more relevant to hazard mitigation efforts, and really building that culture preparedness and building the idea of risk reduction into the community. It's also a sector-based plan. So the way this is working is they have 7 identified sectors. Each sector has a working group that identifies how various hazards will impact that sector specifically, and will also be working on developing mitigation projects to help mitigate those risks to the given sector. One of those sectors uniquely here is the community and culture sector, which will really focus on this idea of they are actively working on profiling all the various communities that exist in the Virgin Islands, such as St. Croix. There's the Crucian population, as well as there's a Puerto Rican population. On St. Thomas, there is your St. Thomians, as well as there's a Haitian population there, and any number of other populations that exist. So they're doing deep profiles of all these to understand who they are and what their needs are and what risks they face. In addition to, the working group is supposed to be composed of artists and historic preservation folks and these idea of community champions to really focus on what are the risks to the community and culture. The plan will also be online and interactive, so it's not a paper-based document, and it will have a heavy reliance on GIS and story maps. Another great example of long-term is this St. Croix Long-Term Recovery Group. They had an art contest. What you see on the left is the result of that art contest. This was the winner. They opened it up to the youth, which is a great way to engage youth in the entire recovery process. And the winner got a bigger art supply set. You can see it on the ground to the right there. And this is now the symbol for St. Croix's long-term recovery. They put it on their business cards. They put it on their Facebook. It is their marketing for everything they do. This is a great example of how FEMA and other emergency managers can actually help the arts. So this is the Alexander Theater at St. Croix. It's an old performing arts center that was damaged during Hurricane Hugo in '89 and has been abandoned ever since, but it is owned by the St. Croix Community Foundation. They acquired the entire block, and this has been sitting ever since. It did receive some minor damage in Hurricanes Irma and Maria in 2017, but it wasn't eligible for PA because it's been abandoned and was not used. But they are turning it into a multi-use facility with a community shelter, which has been approved by FEMA, and it's an HMGP project. So they're doing all the standard work they need to do to, commercial kitchen, showers, bathrooms, making sure there's a layout specific to people can sleep right before, during, and immediately after disasters. In addition, it will be returned back into a performing arts center. So using, performing arts center isn't always doing performing arts, and community shelter is really only needed every once in a while when major disasters come along, or even small disasters come along. So it's really a win-win for the community. It creates this larger economic force in this area of Christiansted, as well as being a place people can go and recognize, even culturally, as a safe place in the community during disasters. Changing gears a little bit to an international view, this is an example of an art installation called Waterlicht, which means water light. This is done by Studio Rusergaard out of Denmark, which is a architecture and design studio. And what you're seeing here is a laser light show that they've managed to create that looks like, if you can tell, it kind of looks like waves in the ocean. And this is a projection of a future sea level rise in 2100 in a particular European square. I'm not sure which one particular, and I apologize for that. But you can see it's very powerful, and you can see how high it is above people's heads. So this is a very powerful interactive risk communication tool to actually understand where water levels might be, not only in sea level rise, but this could also be used to highlight flooding as well. Another example of art is, murals, which are very powerful communication tools throughout a lot of communities. This one in particular is a floodplain mural, which highlights the 2014 floods that occurred in Rock Rapids, Iowa. This highlights where it actually flooded from a sort of aerial point of view, as well as showing water rescue and sandbagging and all those preparedness activities. But the reason this is really important is because it shows that Rock Rapids, Iowa has a commitment not to forget what happened, and will highlight this as long as that building is there and the mural survives, that remembering that it floods and this idea of constantly communicating risk will always be present in the community. Another great example is this Ravenous Park, which is in Fargo, North Dakota. What you see there in the before is it's a stormwater detention facility that was pretty ugly, and anytime it rained, it cut off certain parts of the community. And what you see on the right is this after, and this was a National Endowment for the Arts grant project. They received Our Town grant money to engage Native American tribal artists and engineers to design a stormwater detention that could also be used as a park when it wasn't raining and needed to be used to curb stormwater and flooding. But now you have this beautiful park. It connects parts of the town. People can walk through it. It also has interactive areas where you can learn more about flooding and the importance of stormwater management. This final look at example is a bus stop bike repair station that existed pre-Hurricane Sandy. This is in Seabright, New Jersey. This got damaged, and the community, it was a really central, nice part of the community felt was important to revive. So the original artist, seen on the right, Megan Gilhool, came back and actually was painting it back, but she updated it. So you can actually see, like, there's this little hurricane survival guide in the basket down below. Very important to update, and it's just a little reminder that hurricane is a part of Seabright and will always be a part, and it should be incorporated into our everyday life and not forgotten. A couple of resources I want to highlight is this one called Cultural Placekeeping. It's really focused on the idea of making sure we don't lose our culture, and making sure that as we guide development and resilience projects in our community, that we keep our culture and keep it in place, and also focusing on people and making sure that it's comfortable and culturally relevant to them. Another great is from the National Endowment for the Arts. That's how do you do creative placemaking. Creative placemaking, for those who aren't aware, is like an emerging field within sort of economic development and urban planning, focused on building creative places that help build the economy and engage the whole community, and focus on this idea of cultural identity and what you want to see in a community. To highlight a few things that are going on in FEMA, this is a relatively new project, just was put up to the Georgetown Climate Center just within the last couple weeks. It is the FEMA Region 9 Storytelling Project, and FEMA Region 9, for those who aren't familiar, includes California, Nevada, Hawaii, and the Pacific Territories. There's currently 5 episodes, and they highlight things like the Santa Cruz Integrated Climate Adaptation and Hazard Mitigation Planning story, as well as the city of Tehama staked various funding sources to elevate homes. There are 5 episodes. Storytelling is a really great way to engage in risk communication, as most research shows that we human beings are storytelling creatures by nature, and we retain more information and learn more from stories than we do from technical guidance and pamphlets. So this is a great project that was done by Region 9. From my own Region 2, we've started this series of booklets called Guide to Expanding Mitigation. The idea is that we're looking across sectors that have not traditionally been engaged in hazard mitigation and trying to bring them to the table. And our major audience is, floodplain managers and emergency managers and local officials to engage the whole community. Our first 3 that we did in our public are the arts and culture, agriculture, and public health. And each one of these first booklets in a series is supposed to really, why should you care about arts and culture? Or why should you care about agriculture mixed with mitigation? And then the hope is that we'll we'll create subsequent booklets in each of these topics to dive deeper into these sectors. For example, in the arts and culture, we might want to look at, can you fund public art that's focused on risk reduction within the hazard mitigation assistance program? I don't know, maybe. Could you get CRS points for engaging risk communication public art through murals and interactive floodplain markers and things like that? I don't know, but we're going to explore it and we're going to take a look. And then just to highlight that we are currently developing 4 more in the series, which look into equity, finance, transportation, and energy. And we hope to have many more from there on out. With that, I just want to leave you with this really great poem that was done in the aftermath of Irma Maria by a survivor of the U.S. Virgin Islands named Amina Salem. And I'm going to read it for you. So I hope you enjoy Hurricane Aftermath. This thing they call hurricane aftermath is not like any math I know, not algebra, geometry, nor multiplication. Wait, I know. It's more like subtraction. Take away all everyday conveniences, and what do I have? 0. Then I must figure out a whole new way of living. I get it. Aftermath is the result of a new exponent in a math equation called life. Just like any other math equation, I must solve it so I can move forward. Hurricane aftermath takes critical thinking, but once I get the flow, I'll be okay. I will figure it out because failing is not an option. Okay, in life you must do the math, find solutions to problems after a hard ball is thrown at you, making you wonder how to pick up the pieces and stay sane. Yes, hurricane aftermath is like math. It is always hard, but you feel good when you ace the test. Thank you for joining me today, and I will open it up to any questions you may have. And here's a small bio of myself and a phone number and email if you want to get in contact with me. And thank you and have a good day.
Thank you, Jack. I think that was really great. I've got a few questions here that are coming in, but I'm curious off the bat. I mean, do you have colleagues in other regions? You told stories from 9 and 7 and other places. Like, do you have colleagues that are also kind of looking into this the way you are? Like, it seems like you're looking, I know you're in region 2, but you're looking at it from a national perspective. Have you engaged other regions about this?
Yeah, some of the examples I even highlight are because of the work other regions are doing. And Region 8 in particular out of Denver started this conversation almost roughly the same time as Region 2 without each other knowing about each other initially. And now we're working together to explore this on a more holistic national level in addition to our regional work as well.
There was a question submitted. I'm curious. It's a very interesting one, I think, and it was asking about the potential for CRS points related to public art. Is that anything that you've discussed, or is that idea come up before, or have you gone down that venue?
It is something I've discussed. It is something we are looking into, and I've had some very brief conversations with FEMA headquarters around the idea, and no one's saying no, but no one's saying yes right away either. So it's just a conversation that we're trying to have.
I'm just kind of monitoring the questions here. Was it difficult to find some of those examples? I would think, I mean, it's interesting where some of those are in bigger areas. I think that one was amazing in Europe, the idea of the flood kind of overhead. But was it difficult to find these, or has it just been something you've been, like you said, kind of looking into and tracking down over some time?
Most of the examples have been collected over. I started the conversation mid 2017 before the booklets, and especially got deeper into it after Irma Maria in the USVI in Puerto Rico. But it is extremely hard. It's been hard to find examples, which is also part of the reason we want to do this work, right? But as the work has progressed, and now that the initial booklet is done, more and more examples are starting to pop up that this is not a new concept as much as it hasn't been very prevalent in the work that is directly connected to FEMA.
Again, just kind of watching the site here as things come up. And I apologize if you actually said this. I'm just really curious. This is more of a personal question. I'm asking, how did this come about for you? I mean, personally, I mean, it's such a, it's so, I think, relevant and interesting. And I'm just curious how you started kind of digging into this.
So it actually happened at a national planning conference of the APA was my initial thought. I was attending a planning session on public art, and I was really wondering like why FEMA doesn't in sort of a selfish FEMA way use the art to promote risk mitigation. And it was further pursued, and if anyone's noticed that the FEMA blue color is, I later went to the FEMA booth at the conference and everything was blue and the brochures were blue and most of the people were wearing blue. And so it just made me think, is the message here that we're FEMA or that we're blue? And so I between those two things, I started pushing the idea that maybe we need to get a little more creative of how we're marketing the idea of risk reduction and risk communication. And so that's those two things. And then things just snowballed and there was connections made and started finding art, and it just went from there.
No, I think that's fantastic, because again, I think that's one of those key ways I think that we can increase the message of resilience and mitigation is through things that are common to all communities, right? Like you're saying, and that sometimes they're right there, but we don't even see them sometimes. It's I noticed there was a comment that was made that says, as a CRS specialist, I'd look at the art as a form of social media, and so providing that message is clear on the topic, and they would look for ways to issue credit. So that was just a comment that was made. So,
and I just would add that in a lot of ways, I mean, you can look at all the great work FEMA has funded, and even state and locals who do mitigation outside of FEMA funding, and a lot of the work is just do the work and then you forget about it. And in a lot of the cases, you know, you elevate homes, or maybe you put up a levee or flood wall, and there's a perception that the risk is now eliminated, as opposed to there's still a risk, and we shouldn't forget why we even approach this project in the first place. And that's where like the Iowa mural comes in a perfect example. I'm sure they did mitigation after that, but that is a constant reminder that that risk still exists for that town.
No, I think it's an absolutely great message, like you said. I did, someone asked, Debbie was asking specifically if she missed it, but she was asking for your contact information or ways that people can get a hold of you. Was that, I didn't see it there.
It was on the last slide,
Okay.
but I know I introduced myself as Jack, but you can find me as John, JOHN, Heide, HEIDE at FEMA.dhs.gov.
And I apologize, because that means I mispronounced your name when I introduced you. So
it's fine.
Another comment that just says, I really hope these ideas can grow and become normalized in all FEMA regions. So I think it's been very positive. I think that you are could share those multiple regional examples, you know, so I think that's really great. So just kind of tracking any more questions here. So I guess, Jack, I'll actually leave it with you. Any last words here to share and kind of wrap up your presentation for the afternoon? So.
No, the only thing I would end with is, you know, the FEMA is really trying to pursue a whole community approach, and oftentimes that message, even within FEMA, that it truly is a whole community, I think we forget that. And so this presentation was about the arts, but really there's any number of sectors within your community that should be engaged in this conversation, and in whatever unique way they need engagement. And that's why with the mitigation booklets that I discussed towards the end, like we have agriculture booklet, we have a public health booklet. These are people and sectors that haven't traditionally been involved in the mitigation conversation. And as you can see, we have 4 more that are going to be done by the end of July that talk about equity and transportation, energy, finance. And then we already have a whole bunch more topics already in the back of our heads for even more sectors and ideas that should be included in the conversation, but traditionally aren't.
Well, Jack, thank you. And I want to thank all of our presenters. You know, I can't think of a better wrap up the whole session that was called Unique Approaches to Risk Communication. And so Anyways, this has been a great session. All the information is, I think everyone knows, is going to be made available. Jack's slides, along with the others, will be made, the presentations will be made available, so his contact information will be there. But anyways, I just want to thank everyone. Have a wonderful afternoon, and I'm sure I'll see either some of you tonight at some of the social events going on, or tomorrow. So have a wonderful rest of your day, everyone. Thanks so much.